Well, in today's video, I want to talk about the Bible, the ultimate power source of uncreated energy. In Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis, who's probably the most well-known writer of the 20th century, he told the story of a hard-bitten Royal Air Force officer who had been a man who had very, very little patience for reading, particularly for reading the Bible. Why? Well, because from his perspective, anyone who had experienced God alone in the desert doesn't need to go about the rubbish of reading things about God in the Bible. And Lewis reflected on that. He said, on one hand, well, I guess the officer had a point. As the territory is more real than the map that portrays it, so an experience with God in the cool of the desert is far more viscerally authentic than just reading things about him in the Bible. Well, in the same sense, if you look at the Atlantic Ocean from the vantage point of a beach, you have a far more visceral experience than merely looking at a map of the Atlantic Ocean. Turning from something real to something less real, turning from real waves to little bits of colored paper, well, isn't as exciting as looking at the ocean. But here, said Lewis, is what needs to be understood. The map is based on the experience of thousands and thousands of people who had a real encounter with the Atlantic Ocean. And by the way, these are not isolated experiences. These are innumerable experiences. If you want to go anywhere, the map is absolutely necessary. After all, said Lewis, the map is going to be more use than walks on the beach if you want to go to America, for example. The Bible is like that map, by way of analogy. Merely reading it is less real and vicariously less exciting than the Royal Air Force officer's experience in the desert. But without it, one is bound to get lost. If you don't have a map, you're probably going to get lost, particularly if you're directionally challenged like I am. The territory may be more significant than the map, but the map nonetheless matters. As the map is not the territory, so the Bible is not God. But what it entails is the experience of hundreds of people who really were in touch with God. Experiences compared with which any thrills or pious feelings you and I are likely to get on our own are very, well, elementary and confused. You won't get anywhere by just looking at a map, but you'll likely not get to where you're going without a map. And so again, while it is true that life matters more than truth, the life that matters more is ultimately dependent on truth. And therefore, nothing should take precedence over getting into the Word and getting the Word of God into us. If we fail to eat well-balanced meals on a regular basis, we will eventually suffer the physical consequences. And in much the same way, if we do not regularly feed on the Word of God, we will suffer the spiritual consequences. I love what D.L. Moody said about this. He said that a man can no more take in a supply of grace for the future than he can eat enough for the next 6 months, or for that matter, take sufficient air into his lungs at one time to sustain life for an entire week. We have to draw upon God's boundless store of grace from day to day as we need it. And therefore, we need to read. And there's nothing we need to read more than the Bible. Remember, the Bible is our map. If you have the wrong map, you're never going to get to the right territory. I sometimes use the analogy of a menu and a meal. If I go to a restaurant, I remember being in Tokyo, they had one of these menus that was unbelievable. You can look at the menu and you start salivating. The pictures were that good. But that menu isn't nutritious. You can't eat it. The menu points you to food. And by way of analogy, the Bible points you to an experience that you can have with God. So we have to meditate on the Word of God. We have to memorize the Word of God. We have to mine the riches from the Word of God. And all of that will ultimately lead us into a real relationship, fellowship in the Holy Trinity. This is all part of spiritual formation, living disciplines, life practices that will lead you beyond a transactional relationship with God to a transformational relationship with the lover of your soul. Next video, I'm going to talk about books, from the book, which I talked about in this video, to books. Reading is so important in general. Well, we'll talk about that in the next video.